Good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this discussion on Holocaust memorialization in Austria and Canada. Before I begin, I would like to thank the following individuals and their organizations for taking the initiative to make this discussion possible: the Austrian Embassy in Canada, Montreal's Austrian Consulate, Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center for Holocaust Studies, and the Bissell Family Foundation. Of course, there are numerous individuals from the aforementioned entities who have worked diligently in many capacities, including the technical guidance to bring us together in our new virtual world. These individuals include Ambassador Sylvia Cabich, Cultural Attaché Hannes Macher, Montreal's Honorary Consul Mark Bissell, and Melissa Michael, of the Simon Wiesenthal Center. In addition to these individuals and organizations, I would like to thank Leonie Wolfram and Maximilian Stadacher, two young Austrians who have worked with me since September and will continue through June of 2022. Fulfilling their roles as Gedenkdieners. For those of you who are not familiar with the Gedenkdienst organization, it is most appropriate when addressing the topic of Holocaust memorialization that we familiarize ourselves with the Austrian service abroad. Gedenk is German for remember, and Dienst means service. In lieu of compulsory 6-month military service, young Austrian men may participate in the Holocaust, peace, or social service for 10 months. Recently, the Austrian government has welcomed women in the program, even though military service for women is not compulsory. Dr. Andreas Meislinger, a political scientist from Innsbruck, Austria, founded the Gedenkdienst program in 1991. The intent of the program is to recognize Austria's role in the collective responsibility for the Holocaust. This recognition represents a complete reversal of the erstwhile commonly held position that Austrians were the first victims of the Nazis. I have worked continuously with Gedenkdieners for the past 30 years. I believe that these young people are living memorials to the Shoah. They have all chosen to assume moral responsibility, acknowledging Austria's role as perpetrator of the Nazi genocide. Their commitment to work as Austrian memorial servants, and I say that in quotes, is considerable, involving an additional 4 months of service, as well as personally augmenting the modest financial stipend they receive from the government. I would be remiss in not pointing out that my first Gedenkdienst intern was a young woman. Allow me a few moments to share a personal anecdote on how this came about. In 1993, I was education director at the Montreal Holocaust Memorial Center. I received a letter that had been forwarded to me from the Sadie Bronfman Center, now the Siegel Center. The letter was from a 16-year-old young Austrian, Judith Pfeiffer. She explained in awkward English that she had won a public speaking contest on the subject of Austria's role in the Nazi genocide. She went on to say that although she was not a male, she wanted to do Gedenkdienst service. I was somewhat baffled and put the letter down to greet my friend and colleague, the late Sybil Milton, who coincidentally had just entered my office after arriving from Washington, D.C. Sybil was the resident historian at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. She was fluent in German, having been born in New York City to Jewish parents who fled Austria when the Nazis came to power. I asked Sybil if she was familiar with the Gedenkdienst service. She enthusiastically responded that this was the best thing Austria has ever done since the end of the World War. I have told this story because as late as the 1990s, survivors in Montreal were adamantly opposed to what they viewed as cooperation with Austria. Not without reason, they saw Austrians as perpetrators. At that time, it was impossible for survivors to overcome their personal trauma and recognize the need for post-war generations of Austrians to express their own sense of moral responsibility, and hence memorialization. I will now say a few words about the process of Holocaust memorialization in the Jewish community, followed by its evolution in the Canadian collective conscience. Holocaust conscience emerged within the Jewish community among a group of survivors who had come to Canada after the war, and it was here that Holocaust memory began to take shape. However, this Canadian Holocaust memorialization was limited to monuments in Jewish cemeteries and liturgical memorial services subsequent to the adoption of an official Yom HaShoah date by Israel. These survivor initiatives occurred during the 60s and 70s. The process of memorialization gradually spread to ever greater segments of the Jewish community, to the point where it not only impacted most of the Jewish community, but also functioned as an essential marker of Jewish ethnic identity. Until this point, most survivors had not been fully integrated into the community. It began to change in the 80s when the community formally became involved in Holocaust memorialization. From the survivor community to the nation at large, the Canadianization of Holocaust memory took place in 3 stages. The first step in the evolution of Canadian Holocaust memory occurred with the publication of None is Too Many in 1983 by Irving Abella and Harold Troper. Many Canadians believe that their nation's role in the Holocaust was a shameful one. It is largely rooted in the aforementioned publication, which argues that Canadian anti-Semitism was so strong during the 40s that the government, especially F.C. Blair, the director of immigration from 1936 to 1943, actively sought to prevent European Jews from immigrating into the country, a course of action that indirectly led to the deaths of thousands under the Nazi regime. The refusal of entry in 1939 of over 900 Jews on the SS St. Louis also contributed to the shameful memory. The next stage in Canadianization of Holocaust memory was followed by the highly publicized trials of the Holocaust deniers James Keegstra and Ernst Zundel. Keegstra, a high school teacher, taught that there was an international Jewish conspiracy for world domination, and among other things claimed that the Holocaust was a hoax perpetrated by world Jewry as part of this plan. Zundel, an expatriate, German expatriate living in Toronto, published and distributed Did 6 Million Really Die? Through a series of trials and appeals, the Keegstra and Zundel cases were ultimately brought before the Supreme Court of Canada. In 1990, the court upheld Keegstra's original conviction. In 1992, the court overturned Zundel's conviction. Because of their prominence in Canadian law and media, these cases began a national discourse on the Holocaust. One of Canada's most significant roles in the Holocaust, apart from its role as a member of the Allied forces, was as a place of refuge for those displaced by war. This ever-increasing knowledge in the public forum brought about the 3rd stage in the Canadian collective memory of the Holocaust. What has had an even greater impact on Holocaust memory than the nation's status as an ally is the role that Canada played in becoming a home to many survivors after the war. While the government's post-war immigration policy does not necessarily reflect its interwar attitude towards Jewish refugees, the fact that Canada ultimately became home to tens of thousands of survivors is used to demonstrate the country's concern for the safety of persecuted Jews. I'd like to say a few words now about Canada's National Holocaust Monument. Here we have Laura Grossman, who was an 18-year-old student at the time at the University of Ottawa and decided that Canada had to have a national Holocaust monument. We were the only country without, or only allied country rather, without a Holocaust monument. Tim Uppal, a Conservative MP, brought forward Bill C-442 as a private member's bill. On the same day that Harper's Conservative government fell, the bill passed and became law, and Canada was to have a national monument. It's located not far from the Parliament buildings and was designed by Daniel Liebskin. I think at this point, in the interest of time, I will leave this analysis and we will have a look at the videos of Eric Bissell and Kurt Tutter, who are survivors from Austria.
I remember to this day, 83 years later, standing in Stephansplatz, the troops marching in on the main street with thousands and thousands of flags and Hitler in his open car. And I thought we were attending a party. I said to my parents, wow, this is a great parade, it's wonderful. And I remember my parents saying to me, no, Eric, this is really very bad. This is bad news for us. No reason to celebrate. To my parents making the decision to leave, I must say, my father was a furrier who was born in 1908. When we left, he was 30 years old. He had spent a number of years as an apprentice, as a master furrier, and finally opening the fur store. So he was finally, after all this hardship, he was going to do well. We owe a thank you to one of my father's fur store clients who came in one day and said, you know, you sold me a coat last year. I'm not happy with it. My husband is a member of the Nazi Party, and you're going to have to change my coat for me. My father said, of course I will. And at the end of the day, he locked up his store. He came home and said to my mother and I, I'm never going back into that fur store. I can no longer live here. I have to get out. Shortly after that, my father left on fake papers because the borders were closed. He went to Yugoslavia first. He sent us documents so that we could leave. Fortunately, we got out. We had a journey that took us a couple of years, Yugoslavia, Italy, and finally France. When we were in France, my father joined the French Foreign Legion as a volunteer, which made him a French soldier, which gave us protection. When France lost the war, my father was charged from the Foreign Legion. So my father went to Marseille, and we were in occupied France. So my father arranged for us to be smuggled from occupied France to free France. We went through a wood, and next thing we know, there's a troop of German soldiers. They come to us, and the captain of this troop is from Vienna. He's Viennese. Comes over to talk to us, and he said to me, you know, I'm a little boy like you in Vienna, and I'm sorry to be here. He says, but what could he do? He made a decision with his troop to take us to the train station so that we could go to Marseille, unhindered, unoccupied. We had our own compartment. He ordered that compartment be sealed until we were in free France. We owe him our lives. In Marseille, we left on the last ship to the Dominican Republic. Fortunately for us, my aunt was in the Dominican Republic, and she arranged for us to have a visa. We were in the Dominican Republic from 1942 to 1948. We had family in Montreal, and fortunately, they arranged for us to be able to come to Montreal. And of course, Canada has been wonderful to us. I still think of Vienna as my hometown. I think of Austria as my home in many ways. Wien is die Stadt meiner Träume. It is the city of my dreams. Here we are, a lifetime. Vienna never forgotten, Vienna always there, Austria never forgotten, always there. With gratitude, how they've come the full circle, not just for me, but for Jewry in general. On a visit to Vienna with my son Mark in 2001, in the center of the city, near Stephansplatz, there was a computer where you could find the names of the Jews that perished in the Holocaust. And both Mark and I discovered both my grandmothers had perished in Theresienstadt. I think it was in 1943. And of course, they are going to be listed in the memorial. Much to the credit of Austria to have done such a mammoth project. It is more than stones and names. It's the recognition of the past. And it's coming to grips in a real way with the past and making amends as no other country has. So thank you, Austria.
Mein Name ist Kurt Jakob Tutter. Ich bin hier in Wien in 1930 geboren. Ein echtes Werner-Kind bin ich. Und habe die Shoah in Belgien überlebt, wo ich von einer christlichen belgischen Familie versteckt wurde. Und meine Eltern wurden aber deportiert und wir haben 30 Menschen von einer 70-Menschen-Familie verloren in der Shoah. Und in der Nachkriegszeit wurde ich bewusst davon, dass es in Belgien eine Gedenkstätte gibt für die Deportierten von dem Land. Also die Idee war ganz einfach. Gedenkstätte in Belgien, Namensmauer, nicht wahr? Und wer braucht das mehr? Österreich. Weil Frankreich hatte auch schon so eine. Und in Holland wird jetzt auch eine geplant. Ja? Und dann habe ich mir gesagt, no, ich stelle ein Komitee zusammen in Wien, um das zu verwirklichen. Und so hat es angefangen. Aber hauptsächlich ist es gerade, jedes zivilisierte Volk hat den Gebrauch, das Trauen. Das benötigt der Mensch. Und darum musste das gebaut werden. Aber es hat 18 Jahre gedauert bis zu diesem Moment. Die Kinder von denen, die dort ermordet wurden und die Enkelkinder haben keinen Ort. Es gibt keinen Grabstein. Und wir wünschen nicht einmal große Buchstaben, nur 2 Zentimeter große Buchstaben, wo alle diese Namen sind. Und wo wir auch trauern können für diejenigen Familien, von denen nicht ein Kind am Leben geblieben ist. Das ist mir genauso wichtig, mehr wichtig wie die Namen meiner Eltern. Also das ist die tiefsinnige Begründung für diese Namensmauern.
Well, I now would like to ask our Canadian ambassador from Austria to say a few words. Ambassador Sylvia Cabich, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi. Thank you very much for your remarks. I may welcome all participants and panelists in Vienna, Mrs. Hanna Lessing and Mr. Martin Engelberg, and also to our Canadian partners, Mr. Michael Levitt and Mr. Marc Pisel. Thank you for sharing the time with us to discuss this important matter. Let me take this occasion also to thank the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center for Holocaust Studies and the Holocaust Education and Genocide Prevention Foundation for partnering with the Austrian Embassy in this event. And I am also very grateful to the director of the Austrian Cultural Forum, Hannes Machor, and his team for organizing this panel discussion. As Naomi mentioned, a new memorial of the Holocaust was inaugurated in Vienna on November the 9th. The initiator of this memorial is Mr. Kurt Tutter, an Austro-Canadian Holocaust survivor born in Austria. And I hope you had a chance to watch the broadcast of the inauguration of the Shoah Wall. If not, the broadcast is still available online on the YouTube channel of the Austrian Federal Chancellery. With today's event, we want to honor the work of Kurt Tutter. At the same time, we are also bringing another project to a close, which consisted in a video interview with another Austrian-born Canadian Holocaust survivor, Eric Pisel. You have seen a part of it. And if you want to see the whole project, the whole film, it's available on YouTube channel of the Austrian Cultural Forum. How to cope with the dark chapters in the history of a nation. Sometimes it takes a while before the population and the government are ready to deal with these issues. In Austria, many years passed before we openly discussed Holocaust. But nowadays, the Austrian government takes a clear position. Let me quote from the speech given by Austria's Prime Minister Alexander Schallenberg at the inauguration of the Shoah Wall of Names. I quote, "For too long, Austria has regarded itself exclusively as a victim of national socialism. With the Shoah Wall of Names Memorial, we are now setting a visible sign. We acknowledge the darkest chapters of our history. We take responsibility. We are acting now, and we will do so in the future. For me, this includes reaching out to the victims of the Holocaust and their families, and asking them for reconciliation. End of quote. Thank you for your attendance.
Thank you, Ambassador. And now, who I am with virtually for the second time in as many weeks, I would like to introduce Hannah Lessing. I had the great privilege to actually attend the unveiling of the memorial in Vienna and watched it virtually. Hannah Lessing studied at the Vienna University of Economics and Business. She worked for an Austrian bank as a member of the management staff. In 1995, she became secretary of the National Fund of the Republic of Austria for Victims of National Socialism. She heads the Austrian delegation in the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance and is Secretary General of the General Compensation Fund for Victims of National Socialism and the Fund for Restoration of Jewish Cemeteries in Austria. She is also involved in the redesign of the Austrian exhibition at Auschwitz. Hannah, it's a great pleasure to speak with you virtually.
Thank you, Naomi. It has been a long time since I've been to see you in Montreal. I think I really need to come back. And Eric, good to see you. So many people, I'm really happy, and also friends who have attended. Just a little round of applause. Thank you really very much for the Austrian Embassy, Ambassador Ismail Cabich, and also the Cultural Forum in Ottawa, Hannes Machor. Thank you very much for doing this. In Austria and Germany, National Socialism and the Holocaust are part of people's family history. The Austrian historian Gerhard Botz quoted this once. And this is a very astute diagnosis. So at the National Fund, an organization which is based at Parliament, meaning in the heart of democracy, memorializing the Holocaust and memorializing all victims is one of the central aspects of our work. The National Fund is not only entrusted with restitution and with providing recognition and support to the victims of the Holocaust. Many of you today might remember that when we started out in '95, we reached out to the survivors all around the world, living in 72 countries at that time. But we also support Holocaust remembrance and education, striving to create a connection between the past, the present, and the future. And through our work, we seek, let's say it this way, to combat the historical amnesia, which unfortunately is happening in many countries today. In October and November this year, I had the honor to be the moderator of 2 events dedicated to the special memory of the Holocaust. As it was mentioned, on November 9th, the Shoah Wall of Names of Memorial was inaugurated in a, I would say, moving ceremony with a children chorus, which really went straight to the heart when they were singing Eli, Eli, and we could hear the shofar being blown by our chief rabbi. And I don't want to go further into details because this memorial is the only doing of one person, and this is Kurt Tutte. And at the National Fund, we were allowed to help him as much as we could. But believe me, there were times where I had to tell him, Kurt, this is never gonna happen. And just because he's not born like me in April, I'm sure I'm really stubborn, but Kurt beats it all. He never forgot that he will make it. He will have this memorial. And I don't know how grateful I can say that I am, because as he said, every name is there. And the first time when I went there and I could touch my grandmother's name, who was gassed in Auschwitz, and my great-grandmother's name, who starved in Theresienstadt, I have a place where I can remember them. And this is all thanks to Kurt. And definitely to the politicians who were willing to finally, after 18 years, to make it happen. So it was a big day for Kurt on the 9th of November. It was a big day for all descendants of the victims, and it was a big day for Austria. I really think so. And on 4th of October, also one commemoration, Martin Engelberg was also at the camp museum of Auschwitz-Birkenau. Austria finally reopened its Block 17, where there is an Austrian national exhibition. And the exhibition is really the change of paradigm. We're not talking anymore, as the ambassadress said, about being the first victim, which was there on display from 1978 to 2013. So the new exhibition portrays the fates of Austrian victims in Auschwitz. Definitely, it's a place of commemoration. The acts of resistance carried out by the Austrian inmates, and definitely one very important point, the involvement of Austrians as perpetrators in Auschwitz. It's designed for future generations, first and foremost as a place of commemoration and remembrance of the Holocaust, but also as an expression of a new awareness of our historical past. From the outset, much of the work of the National Fund has been concerned with memory and coming to terms with the past in various ways. Over the years, new tasks were given to the National Fund. We are funding projects. 2,300 projects have been funded since '95, which was also, for example, supporting one of the things that I commend Canada for, the Holocaust Education Week. An amazing weeks of real Holocaust education. So these are the kind of projects that we want to help because it reaches out to students, to scholars, to young children. So really thank you, Canada, for doing Holocaust Education Week. Then we have been tasked to renovate all the Jewish cemeteries in Austria. There are 62 which were devastated after 1938. Only one is still functioning, and now we are renovating them. And one very important thing, Austria, the Parliament, President of Parliament Wolfgang Sobotka has created a new prize, which is called the Simon Wiesenthal Prize, which is a prize dedicated to civic engagement to combat anti-Semitism and/or promote Holocaust education. This year in December, now it was postponed due to COVID, it's going to be awarded for the first time. And we really had 274 dossiers being deposited for this prize. And we are waiting for the day that we can announce the prize winners. For the last few years, the National Fund has been publishing stories of Holocaust survivors because this is a promise that we gave to survivors. Their stories should not be lost and forgotten. So remembrance work also embraces the second generation. We support second generation, especially in family research. Many descendants don't know really how to go to the archives, even if they went, or when they were in Chernovitz or Bukovina. So this is where we really show them their family history. And this includes really detailed research in the fund's historians and genealogical databases, and we do dossiers for them. What we are also supporting through this is that descendants, you know that there has been an amendment to the law passed for nationalities. Austrian descendants of Holocaust survivors were entitled to get the Austrian nationality by the male line always, and this amendment now opens it up to all the descendants of the Holocaust survivors. And here we are helping the descendants find the documents that they need. So, ladies and gentlemen, just on a quick note, we live in times of political changes. We talked about it a little bit before, with discussions arising about questions of nationality, migration in so many European countries, and currently with many social political questions in connection with the pandemic. When democracy seems fragile and vulnerable, it is of utmost importance to learn from history. And when it comes to memorialization, the Shoah is about our family's memories, it's about Austria's memory, and it's about European and the world's memory. So after 26 years of remembrance work in the National Fund, it is still my conviction. The past cannot be cured, but although we cannot cure the past, we can hopefully learn from it. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Martin Engelberg, who has been a member of the Austrian Parliament since November of 2017, upon the invitation of former Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz to be part of the Austrian Conservative Party. In the Austrian Parliament, he is a member of the Foreign Policy Committee and spokesperson for international cooperation. He studied at the Vienna University of Economics and Business. He is also working as a leadership consultant and coach, and he is a lecturer at the Vienna University of Economics and Business, as well as an active member of the Jewish community in Vienna. We're very pleased to have him with us today. Welcome, Martin.
Thank you so much, Naomi, for this kind introduction. A warm hello to everyone here, of which I know a couple already. It's a big pleasure and honor to be here. Excellency, Ambassador, I'm happy to see you again. Well, I did not prepare so much of a speech here or a statement. What I wanted to kind of recall is how this monument got into being and how I was involved. And it was actually a very interesting moment because I knew about the wish of Kotuta to make that monument happen for many years. I think it's almost 20 years that he started his activities. And then suddenly, actually, about 4 years ago, then Chancellor Sebastian Kurz asked me about this monument and the background of it, because he learned that Kotuta was kind of fighting for it for such a long time. So his question was, why did it not happen up until now? I mean, what's the reason kind of people are not supporting it? Or I don't want to give you all the details which I gave him. It was really quite strange how there was a resistance to that project from quite different sides. So, so as much as Kotuta deserves really all the credit for making that happen and carrying that on for so many years, I think it really has to be also said and given credit to Sebastian Kurz, because he, after the conversation we had, he said, you know what, well, I mean, we are going to make it. That's it. And he funded it from his kind of personal budget in the Prime Minister's office, which is not a big budget actually. So he made sure that it is being financed, and still after he decided to go ahead, there was still resistance to it. But at the end, you know, as we say, the bracha, we finally made it. So it's really wonderful having been there, and it was really a wonderful ceremony. Congratulations, also big credit to Hannah, who made a great job in presenting it. So I think most of the things have been said already about the monument. I think it's so special because in the way, I mean, that you have all the names there. It's, I mean, number one is already been said that many descendants don't have even a gravestone where to go to mourn the murder or the passing away of their ancestors. So, and I know what we are talking about. My family was, of course, also hit badly by the Shoah. So just this summer, I went to Krakow for the first time, where my fatherly part of the family was living. So my grandparents got killed, 8 of my uncles and aunts, and I don't know, dozens of cousins were murdered. And if I come to Krakow, I mean, there is not a sign of their existence. I mean, not one, I don't know, place where a name of the family, of any family member would be registered. And it is really hurtful. And I think it's so important that we have now this memorial site where descendants of people, of family members who were murdered there, you can go there, you can light a candle, you can say Kaddish or whatever. So it's really, I think that's one thing which is important. Number two, over the years we learned in the discussion of remembering the Shoah, we learned the lesson how important it is that every victim has a name. So when we were speaking about, numbers, millions of people were killed and 1.5 million children, but only the moment we kind of call the names, we spell out the names, it really gets a special meaning. I remember I once organized a ceremony on Yom HaShoah in the synagogue, and we had the idea that every member of the community who would attend could just state the names of family members who were killed. It was the most moving ceremony we ever had in Vienna, in commemoration of the Shoah. So I think it's a hugely important thing we achieved, and it's also I think it is or will become a national monument in Austria, and I think that's wonderful. As already mentioned by Naomi and others, I think we also have to acknowledge the big steps which were undertaken and which have developed in Austria in the course of the last 35 years. I mean, Hannah and I were both members of the Jewish community. We were born in Vienna, we grew up together, we know each other since childhood. So we know what we're talking about, how much Austria changed in the last 35 years. It's basically the last 35 years. Many of you will remember the very unhappy discussions around Kurt Waldheim. So, but that on the other side really triggered a whole new development in Austrian politics. So I think we now really have a proper education about the Shoah at schools. We have established a national fund. In the meantime, Austria really became almost a fighter on the forefront of combating anti-Semitism in all forms, not only anti-Semitism, but also anti-Zionism. I mean, the relationship to Israel has become so close and friendly. I think Israel would really consider Austria now among the maybe 3 closest friends in Europe. And again, mentioning Sebastian Kurz, I think he played a crucial role in that. And funnily, he's sometimes compared to former Prime Minister Stephen Harper in his attitude regarding Israel. So, we are really so happy about it. Since Andreas, I think also Andreas Meislinger present here, we have to really acknowledge also his work in establishing the Gedenkdienst, the commemoration service. And now most recently, the government has decided to additionally fund the Jewish community because the security costs are also very high, which is actually the case in all of Europe, but not in every country. The Jewish communities get refunded for their sometimes really high security costs. So, there is now we even passed a law that the Jewish community will be particularly funded quite substantially. We have, as already mentioned, now established that law where you can not apply but retrieve Austrian citizenship if you are a descendant of a survivor. And I really encourage you to make use of it. I think also Ambassador Cabich is a perfect example of how open and welcoming our embassies are in, helping, supporting people to get their citizenship back. And we're always saying to get the citizenship back. It's not applying, it's really retrieving the citizenship. So I really encourage you to go for that. And so I think, altogether, your hope is that having a relationship to Austria, which really changed a lot, and I'm happy that Hannah, I myself, my ambassador, and so on, we are part of that big change, and it's wonderful to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. I dare say my relationship with Austria goes back to Ambassador Walter Weichem, so it's long-standing. Now I have the pleasure of introducing a landsman, Michael Levitt, from the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center in Toronto. I, just as an aside, would like to say that I work with his Director of Education for the last few months, and I'm most impressed, not just on this program, but the annual symposium at Vanier College, which has taken place for the last 30 years. Michael was appointed to the center in September of 2020. He is also a member of Canada's delegation to the IHRA, where he serves as Canada's voice in the Anti-Semitism and Holocaust Denial Committee. Before then, he served as a member of Parliament for York Centre, first elected in 2015 and re-elected in 2019. So without further ado, Michael, welcome.
Thank you very much, Naomi. Her Excellency Ambassador Sylvia Mayor Cabich, Austrian Member of Parliament Martin Engelberg, Secretary General of Austria's National Fund for the Victims of National Socialism, Hannah Lessing, esteemed Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center Board of Governor Mark Bissell, and of course Eric Bissell. And I see from scrolling through the names today that we also have representatives from the Israeli Embassy and the Greek Embassy. And if there's any other embassies out there that I can't see because you've just got a name up, we thank you for joining us as well. Good afternoon to my esteemed colleagues and to all attendees joining us today for this important discussion. First, I want to thank the Austrian Embassy for organizing this panel discussion and for inviting Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center to be part of it. On behalf of our organization, I'm honored to participate on this distinguished panel. Every year in Canada, November is Holocaust Education Month. For us at FSWC, teaching the lessons of this horrific chapter of human history is a constant imperative year-round. It is now more than 75 years since the Nazi near extermination of Europeans, and learning about it is as relevant as always. Perhaps even more so today, given the alarming rise in global anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial and the growing trivialization of Hitler's genocide targeting Jews. World War II and the Holocaust may have occurred far away in Europe, but we continue to feel their impact here in Canada. As part of our country's response to the Nazis, more than 1 million Canadians served in the war, with 45,000 killed in battle and another 55,000 wounded, to say nothing of the countless others traumatized for life by what they experienced overseas. Thousands of Canadians lost relatives and friends in the Nazi genocide of Jews, and after the war, many Holocaust survivors made it to our shores and contributed greatly to Canadian society in all fields. To this day, some of those survivors continue to courageously share their harrowing testimony with young people to impact the lessons of this dark chapter of our history. Such was the magnitude of the Holocaust. 6 million Jewish men, women, and children systematically targeted and murdered just for being Jewish, that the lessons are universal and timeless. Sadly, studies show a shocking lack of knowledge among many young Canadians of even the basic facts of one of the worst crimes against humanity in the annals of human history. If we don't continue to teach the lessons of the Holocaust, acknowledge its victims and survivors, and create powerful physical monuments, such as the Canadian Holocaust Memorial in Ottawa and Austria's new Shaw Wall of Names that we're here to celebrate today, then we increase the odds of a similar nightmare reoccurring in the future. As we've heard today, earlier this month, on the 83rd anniversary of the Kristallnacht pogrom against Jews in Germany and Austria, the government inaugurated a monument in Vienna listing the names of nearly 65,000 Austrian Jews murdered by the Nazis. Vienna is where Holocaust survivor Simon Wiesenthal, our organization's namesake, spent the second half of his life bringing Nazi war criminals to justice. Before his death in 2005, he played a central role in creating the Vienna Wiesenthal Institute for Holocaust Studies that opened in 2009, which is today financed by Austria's Ministry of Education and the city of Vienna. For the longest while, Austria had maintained that during the Holocaust, it was primarily a victim of Nazi Germany rather than a willing collaborator. But over the past 20 years, in a significant and laudable reversal, Austrian leaders have acknowledged their country's active role in the persecution and murder of the vast majority of the Jewish population from 1938 to 1945. Case in point, it's not hard to be moved by Chancellor Schallenberg's poignant remarks at the inauguration of the Shoah Wall of Names this month, when he said, and I quote, "We looked away for too long until we realized our role as perpetrators of the crimes and the historical responsibility that comes with it. While we can't change the past, we can change how we look at history to better learn from it and to contribute to a brighter future." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. If anybody has any questions or comments, you're welcome to send them through the chat messenger. I think we've actually had perfect timing to this moment. So I would again like to thank everybody for participating and look forward to seeing you all, not just on a screen, but in person. It's been a long time, I think the last few years for everybody. And even though we may be getting used to this, and technology is actually, I don't even think it's technology anymore. It's just part of life here. It still is wonderful to shake a hand.
Maybe if I may use the time while people may think about a question, let me share an anecdote with you, a very personal on Simon Wiesenthal, who was a very dear friend of my late father. So, and they were speaking with it, when they met, they spoke in Yiddish with each other and everything. He was often a guest at our home. And, but at a certain point, actually, in the discussion about Kurt Waldheim, where Shimon had a very distinctive opinion about, differentiating between his really personal guilt, but then also of the political impact he had in the discussion. So, looking back, he was perfectly right. Me being a young student, I felt that Simon Wiesenthal should be even more strongly attacking Kurt Waldheim. So I wrote a somehow critical article in the Jewish community newspaper, so which led to the following situation, which was really the worst crisis I ever had with my father. My father met Shimon and said, "Oh, Shimon, I'm so happy I'm meeting you. Wherever I come into in the world, people, are so proud of you, and I'm so proud that we are good friends." So Shimon was listening to him, and then he said, "You know what? You go home and tell your son." So my father came home, he had no idea what I wrote. So he was so mad at me as never again or before. And I had to, of course, excuse myself to Shimon. And no, I mean, after that, it was everything perfectly okay. But he was a great person. And but, he was also a person with very strong opinions. So that's what I thought I will share that with you while people are thinking about questions.
Well, thank you.
If I can maybe say, and this is something that, and maybe it gets the conversation flowing, that something Hannah and I were discussing before we went live. The IRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance conference was just last week in Thessaloniki in Canada. We're honored to be represented. Our head of delegation is Special Envoy Erwin Kotler, somebody who, of course, is active not just in Canada. I think he's a beacon and a source of pride around the world on for Jews and on so many other human rights issues. But the act of memorialization is so important as an active process, and I think it's something whether in Austria with the new memorial, in Canada with the Holocaust memorial, where I think there's a need to get even more people to there to be able to experience, to live in that moment of seeing the names and gaining an understanding of what took place. And I think we're seeing, and Martin, as a former MP, I can't speak for Austria, but I think we're seeing this awful situation around COVID develop, where Holocaust distortion around the symbols, the yellow star, the language of the Holocaust is showing up front and center at demonstrations, at protests. And I can only think, it's my hypothesis, that if more people in our society can be brought to that active process of memorializing, of processing what these things mean, so they're not just abstract. It's not an abstract, the yellow star. People died. They were identified by that star and brought to their certain death. And I think that so important. And I, Martin, for you as a member of Parliament, for Hannah, for the ambassador, just a real sense of gratitude for the fact that this memorial and the story it tells is now going to be something that is so accessible to Austrians moving forward. And I just wanted to say that and put it out there.
Maybe I could add something to this. One of our things that we strive the most is to reach children who are, let's go ahead. National Fund is a fund for all victims: Jews, Roma, Sinti, homosexuals, handicapped, political persecutees. We want to reach every child who is not a descendant of a Holocaust survivor, because they very often today, 70 years after, say, what does it have to do with me? That's the over and over returning question. So there are two things that Pierre Nora, the French historian, once said: milieu de mémoire and lieu de mémoire. So we are creating now lieu de mémoire, which are, when you enter this memorial, you have, even for somebody who has no clue about the Holocaust, they see 64,437 names. They just ask, who are these names? Then they see on one block a whole family, Lustig, Lustig, Lustig. It's 35 named Lustig. Then you start asking, what happened to them? So this is on one hand how you can reach them. And our honorary chairman, Yehuda Bauer at the IRA, is using very often, and he just quoted it when we met in Malmö for the Stockholm Forum 20 years. He says about 60 million people were killed during World War II. 6 million were killed, Jews were killed. So 54 million non-Jews were killed because of anti-Semitism. So it concerned all of us, not only the Jews. And I always quote him, because this is a very, very strong reason to tell. It's not the Jewish communities. We do wonderful work. We really work hard, but it is up to everyone to stand up against anti-Semitism.
That's certainly almost a closing note, I would say. Anna, my first reaction to the memorial was it's much easier to understand one by one than 6 million. It's just, it's beyond the realm of an individual's comprehension. They cannot visualize. It's nothing tangible to people. But the memorial, as I walk through, I don't want to say it's like reading a book, but you become reflective is what happens. You think, as you just mentioned, individuals, families, towns, it broadens itself to, this is only Austria, you know. So I was really moved by the memorial. And I don't know if there are any other comments from the speakers, please. If not, I would like to thank everybody for joining, and until we meet again,